So today we're going to talk about the power of preparation, why action plans reduced anxiety in children and teens with selective mutism. I could say adults as well, right? For any individual with selective mutism. So let's talk about it. Why do you feel preparing is so important?
I think that preparing is important because when we think about anxiety in general, I feel like a lot of times it's this fear of the unknown, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen. And many of our kids, because selective mutism is a social communication anxiety, many of our kids, teens, and even adults maybe feel this lack of preparation. They don't know what to expect. So the preparation is so key because if we don't prepare, right, if we don't give them an opportunity to think ahead about what might be coming up, the anxiety could just keep increasing. So once we attend an event or we go somewhere, the anxiety is so high that there's no ability for us to have even a little bit of that social engagement. So I think it stems from the fact that when our anxiety is so high, right, that fear of the unknown, that's why it's so important to have more of that preparation.
And that brings me back to that be brave to talk, right? If a child is not ready, if an individual is not ready to talk, they're just not there. Like
Mm.
you said, just imagine all of a sudden you're going somewhere, you're going to a family function. The child had no awareness to this. They were just like, "Come on, we're going to Aunt Sally's house." I mean, they may not even know who's going to be there because it's a big party, right? So they're caught off guard. That is the worst thing we can do with this population,
Yes.
is to have a situation that someone is not prepared. That doesn't mean you're sitting down writing in a journal, doesn't mean any of that. For some, it's practicing. Hey, we're going to Aunt Sally's house. Let's think about different social communication opportunities for the older child, teen, and adult, where they're like, I'll do interviews, I'll do my big five, I'll do my copy back, I'll do my I am and I just statements, I'll do my action plans, which is what we're going to talk about. But for younger children, just talking in advance of where are you going? Who's going to be there? What common questions could be asked? What's your answer to that? It could be done in a silent goal fashion where it's just talked about in general to help prepare, or writing it down, figuring it out, making it game like, getting points if that's what you're working on, and respecting the baseline stage of communication as our starting point. We don't want to keep someone at their baseline, but we need to respect where they're at as we bridge up, or loud, large, lots of people environments. We have to bridge down. So the key is that misconception of let's just be brave to talk when we're not there yet, or we're not prepared enough to be able to do it. Amazingly, for so many individuals, when that preparation is there, when they know what, when, where, and how, it's amazing how that fuels
Mhm.
their social engagement and communication. So I think it's very important that when people are picking games and goals to do, that when they think about talking, you think about how do we prepare for that social communication opportunity to facilitate verbal communication.
Mhm.
Some may be working on social engagement. When they first get somewhere, they're handing, they're taking, front line. Maybe they're using PVC, prepare visual choices, the SM triangle, bringing them in when someone asks a question through choice, however you're doing it. There's so many strategies and silent goals we work on with parents or caregivers where they're actively involved. So, Dr. Jenna, talk to us about why uncertainty fuels anxiety.
So a lot of times I feel like it's important to think about this aspect because I think many times, as you're mentioning, so many times people are thinking, oh, my child just won't speak, right? And they're not really thinking about the underlying processing challenges that might be going on, which leads to a lot of that uncertainty. So I think a lot of times kids or teens or adults have a lot of challenges with processing, right? There's too much time to think and process. And so a lot of times that can lead to that shutdown. So definitely difficulty with processing is one. A lot of times, not only like difficult processing, but also sometimes our kids are slow processors. They might be like slow to retrieve that information. So when someone's asking them a question, they're still processing that. They're slower to kind of think about putting their thoughts together and then letting it out. So also not just difficulty with processing, but also thinking about how they might need that time to really slow themselves down. A lot of times we have kids that also have comorbidities with having social anxiety. So, really, that fear of making mistakes, fear of perception, how people are thinking about them, that could be playing a role. So, the reason why, we want to be even more into preparation is because that uncertainty, they don't know what people are thinking behind the scenes. A lot of our kids also are perfectionists. We have a huge population of perfectionism. And I think that's a really big component because they want to say the right thing, they want to do the right thing. And so when they're uncertain about a scenario, it's almost impossible to be a perfectionist, quote unquote, because you don't know what to expect. So obviously, we always talk about perfectionism, how to kind of minimize some of those challenges, just because we can't be perfect at everything. We're all humans. And so that is a part of, there are interventions that we do to kind of help decrease some of those aspects. But I do think in general, because we have more of a perfectionistic population, it's important to think about how we want to, how do we want to work through that. I also think, again, because of the social anxiety piece, there's also just like social worries in general. I think in general, a lot of times when we think about how selective mutism is a social communication anxiety, we also think about how a lot of our kids just have other contributing factors like generalized anxiety, like social anxiety. So they might just be thinking in general about these social worries, right? That might be a big contributing factor. And so they're constantly thinking about all the aspects around them, which makes it really hard for them to be in the moment. And then again, like there's other aspects too. I mean, we have a lot of kids that also have some executive functioning challenges, like maybe an underlying ADHD. And that's really important too, because that uncertainty piece could feel really overwhelming. There could be so many parts that are going on when thinking about a social gathering. And so they're feeling flooded with overwhelm of uncertainty. And so that anxiety can obviously trigger up thinking about that. So, listed a few. I mean, there's so many more that we can talk about in terms of why anxiety thrives, in uncertainty. But I think the biggest aspect and the biggest thing to think about is when, individuals don't know what to expect, their brains, right, must process multiple various, or multiple like variables simultaneously. There's a lot going on. And I think that's where we really want to kind of slow ourselves down, and so instead of just enjoying the event, many times they're managing this uncertainty. They're not really in the present moment. So preparation really allows us to be in the moment. It allows us to like slow ourselves down. It allows us to minimize our time to think and process, to minimize some of the social worries because we already know more of what to expect. We might not be as fearful around making mistakes because we're prepared a lot. That's why a lot of times you might notice kids might say, "Oh, going to meet a lot of individuals where I'm not prepared might feel like a 5 out of 5 on my feelings chart, right, of worry. But maybe standing in front of my whole classroom, and giving a presentation might feel like a 4 out of 5. It's still scary, but I had a lot of preparation to do that. So they're not feeling as nervous about going into that scenario. But those are some examples of how some children with SM might experience some of these difficulties in uncertainty.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when anxiety rises, communication becomes harder. How often do we hear my child or my teen, I use the word child to be child or teen, or the individual with SM, right? Is so excited to go to this event, right? A 12-year-old is super excited to go to this birthday party, talks about it all week, gets there and completely shuts down. And the parents like, I don't get it. We had rewards for him. He just completely shut down. I don't get it. What's going on? This is frustrating for me. It's frustrating for him. Why is he just not saying his big 5 words? Why is he not doing this? And when I back it up, because I often say when something isn't working, let's back up as to why. Did you talk about the event? Like, who's going to be there? No, no, he's fine with birthday parties. Okay. Did you know where he was going? No, we didn't know. We were going to this like art studio. And he's fine. He loves art at home. Did he know who was going to be there from was it his class? Oh, it was a neighborhood party. So when I talked to this parent, there was no preparation. It was just going to the party, didn't realize where it was, who was going to be there, didn't think about questions that they could possibly ask him. And he wasn't actively involved, right? As a 12-year-old, you can be actively involved. As a 5-year-old, you can be involved through the common question games, being ready for.